Have you ever noticed how the moments you work hardest to forget are the ones that secretly run your life? There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't announce itself with tears or rage, but instead operates in the dark, a guardian at the gate of everything you want to become, whispering that you're not allowed to pass, that you don't deserve what's on the other side, that if people really knew you, they would turn away. This is the architecture of shame, and it is perhaps the most sophisticated prison the psyche can build, because the prisoner volunteers to be the guard. You're here because somewhere in you there's a recognition that shame isn't just an emotion you occasionally feel. It's a governing structure, an invisible constitution written in childhood that still dictates which parts of yourself are permissible and which must be exiled into the dark. Jung understood this with surgical precision. What we cannot face in ourselves doesn't disappear. It goes underground, and from there it runs us. He called this the shadow, and shame is its most loyal architect, the mason who builds walls between you and your own power, your own desire, your own aliveness, brick by brick, always in the name of protection. What we're doing today isn't learning to overcome shame or defeat it with positive thinking. That's the language of men who haven't yet understood that shame is a part of them, not an invader. We're learning something far more dangerous and far more real. How to turn towards shame, to retrieve what was exiled with it, and to transmute its crushing weight into the very foundation of adult power. What it actually is and what it isn't. Shame is not guilt, though we confuse them constantly, and the confusion costs us dearly. Guilt says, I did something wrong and I need to make it right. It's specific, it's bounded, it points toward repair. Shame says, I am something wrong. My existence itself is the problem. If you saw what I really am, you would recoil. Guilt is about behavior. Shame is about being. Guilt can be resolved through action and amendment. Shame feels ontological, written into the fabric of who you are, unchangeable. But here's what shame actually is beneath its crushing verdict. It's the internalized gaze of early caregivers and tribal others at a moment when you were utterly dependent on their acceptance for survival. When you were small, your parents' faces were your mirror. You learned who you were by seeing yourself reflected in their eyes, and if what you saw there was disgust, disappointment, or withdrawal when you expressed certain parts of yourself, those parts became unspeakable, intolerable, shameful. The child doesn't have the cognitive capacity to say, my father is having a bad day, or my mother's reaction says more about her than me. The child simply concludes, something about me is wrong, and I must hide it, or I will die. And in the logic of childhood dependency, this conclusion is accurate. Rejection from the tribe meant death. So shame evolved as a social survival mechanism, an early warning system that said, hide that part of yourself or face exile. The tragedy and the genius of shame is that it worked. It kept you connected, kept you alive, kept you in the circle of care, even if it meant amputating parts of your own vitality. The boy who learned that his anger made his mother go silent learned to exile his anger, and in doing so he also exiled his boundaries, his capacity to say no, his spine. The boy who learned that his tears made his father disgusted learned to exile his vulnerability, and in doing so he also exiled his capacity for intimacy, for being truly known, for receiving comfort. Shame always operates as a package deal. When you exile the unacceptable feeling or impulse, you also exile its gold, the virtue and power that traveled with it. And so we become adults who are functional and acceptable, but somehow hollow, armored against rejection, but also armored against life itself, constantly performing a version of ourselves that can be loved while the real self waits in the dark, patient and forgotten. How it appears in ordinary life. Shame doesn't announce itself. It operates through proxies, through reactions and patterns that seem unrelated until you learn to see the signature. A man sits in a meeting and feels a surge of rage at a colleague's condescending tone, but instead of speaking he goes silent, his jaw clenched, and later at home he snaps at his wife over something trivial. That's shame, the part of him that learned long ago that his anger makes him bad. So it gets suppressed in the moment it's needed and leaks out sideways where it can do only damage. Another man achieves success after success, each promotion and accolade briefly satisfying before the hunger returns. And he cannot understand why enough is never enough, why he feels like a fraud, even as the external evidence mounts. That's shame, the sense that his true self is inadequate. So he builds tower after tower of achievement, hoping that eventually the structure will be tall enough to prove his worth, but the foundation is poisoned and no height can cure it. The first diagnostic marker is disproportion. Your reaction is far larger or far smaller than the situation warrants, which tells you that something old has been activated, something from before language, from the time when shame was installed. The second marker is projection. You become intensely judgmental or reactive to qualities in others that you've exiled in yourself, and the intensity of your reaction is proportional to how deeply you've buried those same qualities. The man who rages about other men being too emotional or weak is often carrying exiled grief or vulnerability he cannot access in himself. The third marker is repetition. You find yourself in the same dynamic over and over across different relationships, different jobs, different contexts, always cast in the same role, always hitting the same wall. The compulsion to repeat is the psyche's attempt to master old trauma, to finally get it right. But without consciousness, we simply repeat the wound, confirm the verdict, and strengthen the prison. The commandment here is simple and difficult. No shame about the shame. When you notice these markers, the immediate impulse is to add another layer. I'm ashamed of being so reactive, so defensive, so shut down. And now you're trapped in recursive loops, and the only way out is curiosity. Not judgment, not fixing, not even understanding yet. Just curiosity. Isn't that interesting that I reacted so strongly? I wonder what that's about. I wonder what old story just got activated. This curiosity is the beginning of witness, the first crack in the prison wall. Origins and the boy who stayed. Every man carries two timelines, the chronological life of the adult body moving through the world, and the arrested timeline of the boy who never got what he needed and is still waiting, still hoping, still organizing behavior around contracts he signed in blood when he was too young to read. Shame is always a childhood installation, always the result of a moment or a pattern when the boy's authentic expression met with rejection, disgust, or abandonment, and the conclusion was immediate and absolute. This part of me is bad. I must hide it, or I will be destroyed. The father imprint is often the source of shame around power, around anger, around ambition and assertion, and taking up space in the world. The father who rages teaches the son that anger is dangerous and out of control, so the son exiles his own anger and becomes overly accommodating, conflict avoidant, a man who cannot access his own backbone. The father who is cold and stoic teaches the son that emotion is weakness, that vulnerability is contemptible, so the son exiles his own feeling life and becomes brittle, cut off from his interior, a man who can think but cannot feel. The mother imprint is often the source of shame around desire, around sexuality, around need and dependency, and the hunger to be seen and held. The mother who was depressed or absent teaches the son that his needs are a burden, so he exiles his own neediness and becomes a man who cannot ask for help, who carries everything alone, who feels fundamentally unworthy of support. The boyhood contract always follow the same structure. If I show this part of myself, I will lose love, so I must hide it and perform its opposite. If I show anger, I will be abandoned, so I must be nice. If I show need, I will be shamed, so I must be independent. If I show fear, I will be mocked, so I must be tough. And the adult armor that emerges from these contracts looks like strength, but it's actually the scar tissue around a wound, the achievement addiction, the emotional unavailability, the compulsive self-reliance, the performance of confidence, while the inside is hollow and terrified. Reparenting is the work of going back and giving the boy what he didn't get. Learning to meet your own anger with curiosity instead of suppression, your own need with tenderness instead of contempt, your own fear with presence instead of dismissal. It's the slow, unglamorous work of noticing when the boyhood contracts get activated and choosing differently, not because you've healed perfectly, but because you're willing to practice being the adult the boy needed. Contact without collapse. Contact is the moment when the wall between your conscious self and your exiled self becomes thin enough to see through. When what's been living in the shadow suddenly appears in the light and you have a choice. Turn away again or stay present. These moments arrive uninvited, a dream that shakes you awake, a conversation where someone names something in you that you thought was invisible, a moment of unexpected emotion that cracks your composure and reveals something raw underneath. Contact is always a little dangerous because it threatens the stability of the persona, the carefully maintained self that's been getting you through life. And the reflex is to restore the wall immediately, to explain it away, to return to the known, even if the known is killing you. But contact is also the doorway to integration, the only path out of the prison. And learning to stay present during contact without collapsing into the exiled material is perhaps the most crucial skill of mature masculinity. Collapse looks like being overwhelmed, flooded, losing all sense of adult presence and becoming the wounded boy entirely, drowning in rage, dissolving into self-pity, spiraling into shame so total that you're paralyzed. Contact without collapse means you can feel the old wound, recognize it, give it space, and simultaneously maintain enough adult witness to say, this reaction is older than this moment. This intensity belongs to something from before, and I can be with it without being consumed by it. The language of contact is always about making the unconscious conscious, about bringing awareness to what's been operating in the dark. And when you notice yourself shutting down emotionally, if you can name it, I'm shutting down right now. This feels like what I used to do when my father got angry. I'm not in danger now, but my body doesn't know that. You've introduced witness. You've created enough separation from the pattern to begin working with it instead of being run by it. Containment before expression. Every man who begins the work of retrieving his exiled parts eventually faces a dangerous moment. He discovers his anger, his grief, his desire, his power, and he wants to express it immediately, wants to let it out, wants to finally be real after years of performance. And this is where men blow up their lives, where liberation becomes destruction, because there's a crucial distinction between expression that's clean and expression that's contaminated. And the difference is containment. Containment is not repression. Repression is shoving the material back down into the dark, denying it exists. Containment is the vessel, the inner structure that can hold the intensity of what's been exiled without either suppressing it or letting it flood out unconsciously. And without containment, expression becomes a tantrum, a wound spraying shrapnel, a boy's rage in a man's body wreaking havoc. Clean anger is specific, proportional, present. It responds to what's happening now. It names the boundary clearly. It seeks resolution, not vengeance. Dirty anger is global, disproportionate, historical. It's fueled by everything that went unexpressed before, and it seeks to punish, to humiliate, to make the other person feel as small as you've felt. Containment is what allows you to feel the full intensity of your anger, to let it move through your body, to recognize its message, and then to choose how and when and whether to express it in a way that serves your actual needs, instead of just venting your accumulated pain. The same principle applies to power, to sexuality, to grief. Containment means you build the inner capacity to be with your exiled material before you act on it. And this capacity is built through solitude, through practice, through learning what it feels like in your body when the energy is clean versus when it's contaminated. Consequences of avoidance versus integration. There are only two paths available once you begin to see your shame clearly. You can turn away again, rebuild the wall, return to the performance of the acceptable self, or you can turn toward, integrate, bring home what was cast out, and accept the discomfort and difficulty of becoming whole. The path of avoidance looks successful from the outside for a long time. The man continues to achieve, to perform, to maintain the persona. But the costs accumulate in ways that are invisible until suddenly they're catastrophic. His relationships remain superficial because he cannot be truly known. His work becomes hollow because the whole structure is built on, if I achieve enough, I'll finally be acceptable. And that premise is poison. His body keeps the score through tension, fatigue, numbness. The real cost of avoidance is that you never become who you actually are. You remain the version of yourself that was constructed to be acceptable, and somewhere in the second half of life, the performance starts to feel unbearable. The path of integration is harder in the short term because it requires you to face what you've been avoiding, to feel what you've been suppressing, but the gains are real and they compound. Your relationships deepen because you can be known. You stop performing and start revealing, and you discover that being truly seen is more nourishing than being admired. Your work becomes meaningful because it's connected to something real in you. There's a quality that emerges in men who've done this work that's unmistakable. Calm backbone, the ability to be both strong and tender, both decisive and receptive, both powerful and vulnerable. You have clarity because you're not constantly managing the internal war between what you show and what you hide. The energy that was tied up in maintaining the persona is now available for presence, for creativity, for relationship. for the actual work of your life. And there's warmth with spine, humility that's not self-deprecation, but accuracy, responsibility that's not burden, but fragrance. When a man is no longer organized around avoiding his shame, he stops needing to control outcomes and becomes simply available, present, useful, a man who can be counted on. Archetypal framing, the king's integration. The work of transmuting shame into power stabilizes what Jung and later psychologists called the king archetype, the part of you that can see the whole system, establish right order, and empower those in your domain. But the king runs on clarity and integrity. He cannot bless what he secretly despises. He cannot establish order when his internal house is in chaos. And shame is the king's greatest enemy, because shame says, "You're not worthy to sit on the throne, you're an imposter." The shamed king becomes either the tyrant, desperate to control because he's terrified of being exposed, ruling through fear, or the weakling king, abdicating responsibility, unable to make decisions or hold boundaries because he doesn't believe in his own right to rule. The integrated king has transmuted his shame into humility, which is not self-negation, but accuracy. He knows his strengths and his limitations. He's not inflated by success or destroyed by failure. And from that grounded presence, he can bless others because he's not competing with them. He can establish order because he's not managing his internal chaos through external control. When shame is integrated, the king becomes capable of blessing instead of controlling, and this is what mature masculine leadership looks like. Not domination, not performance, but the capacity to see clearly, to hold boundaries lovingly, to empower without needing to be the center, to serve something larger than the wound. Responsibility and witness. There's a paradox at the heart of this work that must be named directly. The deepest transformation happens in solitude, in the moments when you're alone with yourself and there's no one to perform for, when it's just you and the exiled parts and the question of whether you're willing to turn toward or turn away. These are the decisive moments. 3 in the morning when you can't sleep and the shame is crushing and you have the choice to distract yourself or to stay with it and ask what it's trying to tell you. No one witnesses these moments. No one can do them for you. And this is where the work is actually done, where the prison opens or stays locked. But you cannot do this work entirely alone, cannot sustain it through sheer will, because shame thrives in isolation, and the antidote to shame is witness, is being seen in your actual complexity by another human being who doesn't turn away. This is the role of brotherhood, not the superficial version where men gather to watch sports, but the actual brotherhood where men can show their wounds without shame, where the performance drops and the real work of witnessing each other happens. You do the work in solitude, you face your shame alone, you make the choice to integrate, and then you bring that work to a witness, to another man or men who can see what you've done, affirm what you've discovered, challenge what you're still avoiding. The refrain that must be repeated until it becomes your operating system is this: not perfectly, reliably. You will not transmute your shame once and be done. You will not have a breakthrough that solves it forever. The work is not about perfection, about becoming the man who's beyond shame. That's just another fantasy. The work is about becoming reliable in your relationship with yourself, about developing the capacity to notice when shame gets activated, to recognize the old patterns, to choose differently, not because you've healed perfectly, but because you're practicing the new pattern, and to return to that practice again and again, not perfectly but reliably, until the new pattern becomes as deep as the old one once was. Closing. Shame is not your enemy. It's the guardian of what you exiled when you were too young to know you had a choice. The power you're looking for isn't out there, isn't in the next achievement or relationship or breakthrough. It's locked in the parts of yourself you learned to hide, waiting to come home. The anger you suppressed is your spine. The need you denied is your capacity for intimacy. The fear you exiled is your access to wisdom. The shame that crushes you is the raw material of the very presence you're trying to become. This work doesn't ask you to be fearless or perfect or finally acceptable. It asks you to turn toward what you've been running from, to meet yourself in the dark, to discover that you can hold what you thought would destroy you. It asks you to stop performing and start being, to let the people who matter see you as you actually are, to trade the prison of acceptability for the risk of aliveness. And it asks you to do this not once in some heroic transformation, but every day in small choices, in moments of contact, in the decision to stay present when everything in you wants to armor up and run. Be that man, not the one who's healed perfectly, the one who turns toward reliably, the one who can hold his own complexity without collapse, the one who's doing the work. Begin.